Hi everyone and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today our presenter, the Head of Professional Services, Giles Garnett, will be showing you how to boost your outreach by managing multiple LinkedIn accounts with Raspberry Pi. Me, Jen, the Head of Customer Support, will be answering your questions via live chat, and at the end of the webinar, as usual, we will have a Q&A with Giles. So let's begin.
Thank you, Jen, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to everyone, wherever you may be in the world, and thanks for joining us in the latest of our series of free webinars. And in this case, as Jen just mentioned, we're looking at different ways to manage your LinkedIn and Dux-Soup activity. For anyone who's new to Dux-Soup, my name is Giles. I'm Head of Professional Services here at Dux-Soup, and I run the booster sessions, the technical sessions, as well as presenting the webinars. As always, I'm using my experience that I pick up from customers, from our own experiences within Dux-Soup, to share our knowledge with you and bring you new and innovative ideas and ways to use Dux-Soup in the LinkedIn environment. So today we're covering a slightly different topic insofar as I'm going to be talking about different platforms you can use to run Dux-Soup on. 2 weeks ago, we talked about scaling up and being able to run multiple accounts on a VPS, and we demoed an Amazon light sale example. Today we're going completely the other end of the scale, but much of the theoretical situation is the same, and I'm going to show you how you can run Dux-Soup on a Raspberry Pi. So for clarity, I'm not going to go through the functionality of Dux-Soup today. I will demo a little bit of it within the Raspberry Pi environment. I'm going to be talking about how you might want to set up such an environment for your lead generation, how and why. As always, Jin, who you just heard from, Head of Customer Support, will be monitoring the live chat, answering as many of your questions as possible. Do keep them on topic, and that will help everybody out. If you have other questions, you can always contact our support team on the support pages or via the email address info@dux-soup.com. And before anyone asks on the live chat, I'm sure somebody maybe already has, yes, the session is being recorded and will be made available via the usual channels. So let's see if this works. I'm not going to bother going through what Dux-Soup is because I hope everybody who's on here will know. And if you don't, then have a look through our library of previous webinars and you will get a very good summary of all of that. But if you're now in a situation where you're running Dux-Soup for yourself and maybe some other people, traditionally you as a user will use the most convenient solution, which for many people is to run their lead gen activity on the device that they use for their day-to-day activities, so your laptop or your MacBook or your PC, whatever. So what can you do if this is perhaps no longer convenient? Perhaps you've got multiple accounts for multiple clients or colleagues, or perhaps you just don't want that inconvenience of having Dux-Soup using up your laptop's hardware resources. So a couple of weeks ago, we looked at a VPS, i.e. outsourcing the hardware computing requirements to a remote server and being able to run your activity from there. And that is the perfect solution for users who are looking at scale. Got a lot of accounts, perhaps have the budget to be able to spend an amount of money every month on those types of services. So what if you're in a position where you want to run Dux-Soup, maybe multiple accounts somewhere other than your own device? You maybe have a few accounts, but maybe not lots, and you don't want to be spending too much money every month on server fees. Well, here we're looking at a number of different low-cost options available to you, each with their own sort of plus points and minus points. And I'm just going to touch on those now and explain the possibilities. So option number one, over on the left-hand side, here we go. Use a different device. If you happen to be lucky enough to have a spare device, you could use this to run your lead gen activities, maybe an old laptop, PC, MacBook. I know a lot of users who do this, and they can leave this running all day without any Dux-Soup actions interrupting their day-to-day activities, making sure they've got their power settings set accordingly so it doesn't go into sleep mode. Just make sure you log into your correct Chrome account and make sure that you keep your system up to date with the latest updates and security patches. Also ensuring Chrome's up to date. It's a great solution for those who are in the fortunate position of having a spare machine. It's also possible to run multiple accounts in this scenario, depending on the specs of the machine. But Make sure you use the planner as well, as always, so it doesn't look like you're on more than one device at a time. We've covered that before in past webinars. When you're running automation, make sure that that is the activity going on that account and not anything else elsewhere. That's another low-cost option. In the middle here, we've got a Chromebook, running Dux-Soup from a Chromebook. Chromebooks are increasingly popular because of the relatively low financial cost of acquiring one. And you can run all your Dux-Soup actions from a Chromebook, but make sure of a couple of things. You turn off the power saving features because they go into sleep mode quite quickly, and you keep your Chromebook up to date. There is a limitation with a Chromebook in that you can only run a single account concurrently on a Chromebook. You can't have multiple sessions open, multiple Chrome logins running simultaneously. So that is a limitation. Third option, on the right hand side, there we go, there's our Raspberry Pi. Run Dux-Soup on a Raspberry Pi. This is potentially a very low cost option. Now you can pick up a new Raspberry Pi for anything between $35 and $100, depending on the specifications you get. However, it does require some time invested from the user's point of view to set up such a device. And there are some limitations of going down this road, and what I hope to do today is just to show you what's possible with a few illustrations, as it may be appropriate for some users. Remember, it's just a one-off cost. You haven't got that recurring monthly fee that you would have with a VPS. So for anyone who's on here and who doesn't know what a Raspberry Pi is, the Raspberry Pi was launched back in 2012, with the original intention of it being a low-cost single board computer to make basic computer science accessible in schools and developing countries. Since then, it's been adopted by many other groups and hobbyists, and it's become phenomenally successful and has now sold over 40 million units up until the middle of last year. It's credit card size, so if you haven't seen one before, it's about the size of a credit card, with incredibly low power requirements and standard interfaces, so you can connect to your existing hardware if you've got a monitor, keyboard, mouse, Ethernet connection, for example. The latest incarnation of the Pi is the version 4, and there's a few different variants with different amounts of RAM, etc. But essentially, all versions of the Pi can run the same operating system and can therefore support the solution I'm going to demo today. It runs on its own operating system. It's a Linux-based OS. Okay, so why would you run from a Pi? It's a very low-cost solution. You have no recurring costs. You can offload your computing requirements to another device and just leave it running all day using minimal power and just let it go. So if you've got a Pi and you're wanting to set it up, there are some fantastic resources online. So it doesn't really need me to go through all of those steps, but there's a link here, and also on the handout on the webinar pages, on the webinar page, I've put the handout there with some links on. Basically, we'll just have a flick through those instructions. If you haven't got Chromium already installed, Chromium is the vanilla version of Chrome, if you like. Then you sign into Google, you link your Dux-Soup account, and then you sign into LinkedIn and run your lead generation activities. What we'll do is we'll just go to this link here a second. So here we are, this link here, and this is under the official raspberrypi.org webpage, which is the resource to go to for all of your Raspberry Pi requirements. And what you'll see here is you have a full step-by-step instruction as to how to set up your Pi. Now this is the version 4 that's illustrated here, but all of the other versions are covered within this these setup pages, and it goes through here what you will require: a power supply, etc., etc., the different requirements of the power supply, a micro SD card depending on the variant you've got, mouse and a keyboard, and then some sort of a screen, be that a monitor or a TV screen, and you have a number of different connectivity options there for your screens. It then takes you through the setup of your SD card, how to get your image onto the SD card, etc., etc. Install your operating system and get it all up and running as quickly as possible. Now, I did this from scratch with a completely fresh Raspberry Pi, and that was a version 2. I did this last week, and from beginning to end, the process took me 30 minutes, and that included creating the image of the software on the SD card, setting it all up from scratch, installing Chromium, logging into all of my accounts, and getting it all up and running. That was one time I did it. I then tried it with a different version of the Pi, the Pi Zero, and because I had some issues with an SD card, it took quite a bit longer. So be patient, follow the instructions step by step. We've got some instructions on our website as well, which also refer back to these pages here as well. And it takes you all the way through the steps, how to set up, and then eventually you get to the home screen here, which is the Raspberry Pi operating system. We'll come to that in a second. Now, there's a couple of things that I had to do in the settings of the Raspberry Pi to make sure that everything worked correctly. And I'll just come on to those a second. There we go. Run the robot slowly. Remember that a Raspberry Pi does not have the processing or computing power of a laptop, of your Windows laptop or your MacBook. So run things slowly. It takes time for the robot to gather the data from each page. So I'd recommend changing the browser performance settings accordingly. Be aware that there is a limitation with regards syncing with regards to Google and Chromium. There's a link, I think, on the handout as well, which explains that. However, that doesn't stop you from being able to log on to Chrome, link your Dux-Soup account accordingly, and then just leave it to run. It basically becomes a bit of an issue if you're constantly logging out and etc. like that. So now what I want to do is to demo how this looks. For the convenience of this demo, I'm actually going to run the Pi software on a virtual machine on my laptop, just to give you a sense of what it looks like and what to expect. So if I just grab, there we go. So this here is my virtual Pi. This is the home screen of a Pi once you've got everything installed. If I now click over here, you see my menu bar along the top. I've got my menu here. I know that the image is not 100% clear. That's just because of the virtual machine, I'm afraid. Hopefully it's good enough for everybody to be able to see. But this is how it would look when you'd first installed. And as you can see down here, you have all your various preferences and options down here. Say it's a Linux-based operating system. You can go through your setup and set up your location preferences, etc., etc. Other bits and pieces, you have the file manager, as always with an operating system, command line if you need to enter anything via the command line. And then, of course, up here, it's already actually on my version. When I installed this particular version yesterday, it came with Chromium already installed, and you can see I've got a shortcut to Chromium there. I also have it here under the Internet Chromium web browser. If I now open my Chromium web browser, just wait for this to open a second. And we can see here, I've already logged on and installed, it's already synchronized the fact that I've got Dux-Soup. You can see here, it's already picked up my Dux-Soup details here. I just logged in with my usual Google credentials. And if I go down to my Dux dash here, I can now see everything. It does take a minute or two because it's not quite as instantaneous as running in Windows. As I say, the screen's not completely clear because I've had to adjust the resolution accordingly. But what I have here, I can see my credentials. I can see here my campaigns. I've got Turbo installed here, so for anybody who's a pro user, then you won't be so familiar with that. But I can see here all of my details, and if I scroll down to the bottom here, I can see everything accordingly. So that's my Dux dash. If I now go to here and I go to my LinkedIn page, just wait for that to load a second. Shouldn't take too long. So it sometimes does take a little bit longer in the Pi environment, of course, just the nature of the operating system, etc., etc. And there we go. It will get there very shortly. There we go. Now, I always say this. This is me. You can see me here. I'll just go to my my LinkedIn page. Feel free to send me a connection request. Very happy to interact with Dux-Soup users on LinkedIn. Happy to answer questions and interact with you via LinkedIn. So feel free to send me a connection request. I appreciate it if you put a message in there so I know how you found me. But do feel free. That's great. So now if I just go to whichever list I would normally want to go to carry out my Dux-Soup activities. Let's just scroll down here a second. So if I go and find just a list, for example, I'm going to take this one here. There's 29 people have liked this. And as per usual, as I would in my normal everyday Dux-Soup activities, you can see there the Dux-Soup icon recognizes this is a list, and I can carry out my chosen options from here. So I can, for example, if I just press the scan button here, we see the Dux-Soup robot kicks into action as usual. I've got it running on slow at the moment. I'm not running it too quickly. In fact, I'll just double check that because I may have changed that. Let's go to my options a second. So here under my throttling, I'm scanning quickly, but I'm running any visiting activities quite slowly. And the one thing I mentioned earlier about browser performance, make sure I would recommend that you change your browser performance here if you're using it on such a device to take longer than you normally would, because it does take time for the pages to render within this environment. So it's really a case of, you're not needing to do this quickly. You're not needing your lead generation activities to happen quickly if you're running it in such an environment, because you can leave it running all day and it's not going to interrupt your activities that you're carrying out on your own usual laptop. If I go back here, we can see it's still scanning away here. It'll take a minute or two to scroll through that page. But if I stop this, the robot here, there we are, we can see I've got some data there. And as usual, I can just go up here and I can download my data. Now, I don't have Office or anything on here. However, I could just now then log on to, for example, my Google Drive, share that file that I've just downloaded to my Google Drive, and then open it in whichever environment I would require. And of course, if I was using Zapier or Integromat, which is now called something else, and I can't remember, Make, I think Integromat has rebranded itself as Make. If I was using that environment, of course, all my webhook data would be forwarded there accordingly, so I could grab that information from whichever environment I happen to be in. If I just go to my file manager, then here a second, I look at my downloads. There we go. So I can then see here my latest scan files that I've downloaded here accordingly. And all of your regular Dux-Soup activities will get carried out here within the Chromium environment as exactly as it would be in your desktop. It's incredibly handy. It's, as I say, very low power consumption with regard to Raspberry Pi. So it's very efficient, cheap to run, and also cheap to acquire. It does require that extra bit of work up front in order to set it up and get it running. And as I say, there are a few different options with regards which Pi you buy. There's, I think, there's 3 specific ones with 2, 4, or 8 gigs of RAM. Of course, the more you get, the better, but any of those will be perfectly adequate to be able to run your Dux-Soup activity from. If I just pop back to the slides a second, because the other thing I'd like to explain as well, and I'm not going to demo this so much, but what I would also like to point out is that you can also use remote desktop tool, for example, XRDP or VNC, to be able to then run your Pi without mouse, keyboard, monitor. So once you've got it all set up and you've got everything enabled and you've got all of your remote desktop protocols set up, etc., you can then run everything from your usual laptop. Just leave your Pi running somewhere on your desk, and then or wherever, and then just access it periodically from your own laptop just to see what it's doing. That way you don't have to have a monitor running, you don't have to have anything else plugged into it, and that can be a super efficient way of doing this. It takes a little bit more time and effort, but there's also a couple of links in the link pack that I've put there for the webinar. So consider that as well if you want to go that step further. This is a very usual, quite a common way that users will set up, for example, Raspberry Pis are used for lots of different things, but one of the things I've seen a lot of people use them for is as a media server, and they'll often set it up in as a headless system, set it all up, and then just leave it, and then periodically just check back in to change any configuration. And that's exactly the same theory as well with Dux-Soup. You know, you've set up your campaign, and then you can just set it off to go and then leave it for a few days before having to go back and check. And remember, you can use all of the throttling settings within within Dux-Soup, and all of your daily limits, etc., and indeed the planner. Really, really important that you remember to use the planner to only have Dux-Soup running when you want it to. So just one last quick look. So there you are. Oh, it's disappeared now, hasn't it? There we are. Let's go there. Let's go back here. No, it still doesn't want to. It's because I'm picking up the wrong window. There we go. So yeah, this is as I say the Pi environment. Let's get rid of that. There we go. That's my desktop there. Effectively within the Pi environment. There's my Chromium link. My normal accessories, applications, etc., that have been installed by default. And yeah, very, very straightforward to set up. Let's say when I did this a couple of weeks ago, it was last week, I think it was, from scratch. It took me half an hour. So I wouldn't expect it to take anybody less than that, unless you get your Pi pre-configured when you get it when you buy it. Sometimes you get them with the operating system pre-installed, and then it can be a very quick thing to set up. But there's you know, it's relatively simple. There's a huge number of resources available on the websites, so make use of those resources, and yeah, experiment. It's a relatively low cost solution. So in summary, it's a low cost solution. You can run, I wouldn't recommend running more than 1 or 2 profiles per device. You will find that everything will slow right down if you try and run more than 1 concurrently. But you could use the planner, for example, to have 2 loaded up and run dovetailed, if you like. It does require some time investment up front to familiarize yourself with how to set up this sort of a device, but it's got incredibly low running costs. And you know, there are people who I'm aware of who've got 4 or 5 of these set up doing various different things. So some maybe 2 or 3 for lead generation and maybe something for something else. It's a great way to offload your hardware requirements off your laptop. If you need your laptop for presenting and doing other things in your day-to-day work, you can then leave everything else in your lead generation to go ahead in your Raspberry Pi. There are, as I say, there are the other options. You've got your old device, your old laptop, or your old computer, or a Chromebook as an alternative, and of course the if you like the no expense spared version, of course, which of course using a VPS. But all of these things are perfectly valid. And oh, that's the wrong button. Didn't want to do that. I wanted to do that. There we go. They're all perfectly valid possibilities for being able to do this all. Okay, there's a couple of other things I want to just touch on before we go to Q&A. So get your questions in. Hopefully they're coming in. Something that we launched earlier this month. Yes, we are in February still. Yes, we've launched our Dux-Soup High Flyers benefits, and this is available for any Dux-Soup team and agency plan users. It's got a number of different benefits which you can see there on the screen, from priority email to tech calls and accelerator calls, as well as access to a High Flyer user group session. You can see there at the bottom the thresholds of the different tiers, if you like, whether you're an agency or a team plan. So be aware of that. If you've got an agency or a team plan and you've got a number of seats, then be aware that you may qualify for High Flyers. And if you do get that, then you can of course get information from our supports team. They will provide you with more data information if you ping them an email or contact them via the website. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to be looking at enrolling. There's been quite a few questions come in recently about the enrolling process with regards campaigns. So this is very much a turbo-focused webinar. So thought it was relevant to cover this, and we'll go through the different options for being able to automate your enrolling or semi-automate your enrolling, and the different options that you've got from different environments. So that's what we're going to be touching on in covering in 2 weeks' time. Just a quick reminder, booster and technical sessions are available. So if you need extra help, if you need support in setting things up or in being able to understand things, then you can book these via our website or via the support team. There's lots of time slots available. So yeah, feel free to get those in. Gin, I think we're pretty much on time. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I have a couple. So the first one and the quickest one would be, what model of Pi were you running during the demo?
I was actually running on my laptop a virtual machine. So I was not actually running it from a Pi. I've got 4 here on my desk, but for screen sharing simplicity, it was much easier for me to run it through just through a virtual box here on my laptop. So I've actually got an original Pi here, a Pi, the very first one. I've got 2 version 2s and a Pi Zero. I don't yet have a version 4 because they're a little hard to come by at the moment, because there's been some supply issues with regards microchips. So there is a little bit of a lead time with that. So yeah, I was just running it as a virtual machine on my laptop. You can see here it's just running as an Oracle VirtualBox there. So I just downloaded the operating system to be able to demo it for you, so you could see what it would look like and how it would feel to see it. Yeah, I figured that actually screen sharing from a Pi while screen sharing from my Windows environment and broadcasting over GoTo was probably not going to be 100% reliable. So I figured that this was probably the most reliable way to do it. So yeah, that's you know, if you have the option, if you're looking at getting a Pi, then I would recommend get the version 4 if you can. And then yeah, just decide how much you want to spend, whether it's the $35, I think it's around $35 for the lower end one, all the way up to, I think it's 90 or 95 for the high spec one. But then you may want to get you may need to get your SD card and a case, etc., etc. So figure that out depending on what your budget is.
Thank you. That makes sense. Another question would be, why could I need a Pi device in place of a Windows device? In what scenarios you could suggest using Pi?
Really, it's just a cost perspective. To buy a Windows device, a Windows laptop, yeah, depending on where you are in the world, can be quite expensive, especially if you're buying something that's relatively modern. Now, of course, you could use a second hand or an older laptop, but the power requirements of a Pi are much less, and the initial outlay is much less than buying a Windows laptop, for example. You're not paying for the storage, you're not paying for all the other bits and pieces for the screen, etc., etc. So you're looking at a much lower initial outlay, and then ongoing, you're also looking at much lower power requirements as well. It's very much, you know, personal choice as well. One thing that I was looking at the other day as well, and I'm going to try and find it while I'm talking. No, I can't see it right now. There's also another option if you've got old hardware, which maybe you're not using, so an old laptop or something like that. There's a new version of the Chrome operating system being made available, so you can actually now make an old Windows laptop into a Chromebook. If that's an environment you feel more comfortable running in, it's down to really what you feel comfortable in. You know, there's a lot of people who are familiar with Windows, they feel comfortable with Windows, or within the should we say the Apple environment as well. You know, maybe that's the environment that they feel happy in and comfortable in. Myself, I've used Linux for many years of varying different flavors, shall we say, Ubuntu or Mint or various other different bits and pieces. So I've always had a familiarity with that environment as well. So it's really down to personal preference and how much money you want to spend. So yeah, those are the considerations that I would think about. There's a lot of people for whom, yeah, an old device, an old laptop or hardware is perfectly acceptable. and accessible. It's not accessible for everybody. So yeah, those are my thoughts, and that's just, you know, how I see it. Everyone else has a different perspective, of course, and for some people, you know, spending $8 or $10 or $12 a month on a VPS may be a viable option. But if you're doing that every month, that soon mounts up. So yeah, there we go.
Thank you.
Any further questions?
There's one user who's asking, would you be able to show the solution with different LinkedIn accounts running?
I don't have more than one LinkedIn account, so let's have a think. I guess if I go to a new window here and then I log in here with a different let's try logging in as, nope, that's not going to work, is it? Oh, it's because I need to, there we go. Yeah, I don't have a second LinkedIn account to log into, unfortunately, but you can basically, in the same way that you can add multiple users within a Windows environment, you can just log in, add additional users here. Yeah, so at the moment I could just add another user here and run and have multiple Chromium windows open within the Pi environment. So I would not have more than 2 personally, and I would be quite reluctant to have them both running in parallel, to be honest, just because of the processing capabilities of the device. I'm trying to see if I can find another Chrome account here to log on to. Let me see if I can. Oh, I think I have to actually. Yeah, for some reason it's, I think it's because I'm doing it on a virtual machine and it's not rendering a great size of window. That's not looking particularly good, but I have been logged on to more than one Chrome account in parallel on a Pi. Say, I wouldn't recommend running more than 2 at once, but yeah, it is definitely possible. I don't have access to another LinkedIn account at the moment, so I wouldn't be able to log on to more than one at the moment. Anything else, Jin?
Sorry, I forgot that I'm muted. The question would be, is it possible to control multiple accounts using remote control?
Is it possible to control multiple accounts using remote control? I assume that you're talking there about having multiple Raspberry Pis set up, running multiple, I assume that that's what they're talking about there. Yeah, I mean, you can basically, when you come to setting up remote control to your Raspberry Pi, there's a few steps you need to go to, one of which would be to make sure that you're running a static IP address. So each Pi then would have its own IP address, and then you're logging on to that particular IP address. And yeah, depending on how many devices you have, you can then log on to as many remote desktop sessions as required. So yes, you could definitely do that. Absolutely. I mean, I can run multiple remote desktop sessions from here to VPSs, etc., etc. So yes, you can do that, absolutely.
Thank you. That's it from me and from our users today.
Cool. Well, just to say as well, you know, the idea of this is really to give you ideas. I don't want to tell you exactly how to do it insofar as, you know, this is how you should do it, step 1, step 2, step 3. This is about giving you ideas and giving you options as to how to do your lead generation. Going upscale and you know, looking at volume, use a server, use a VPS, absolutely. To me, that would be a no-brainer. If you're looking at a smaller scale, you have more options, and it depends upon your personal circumstances from a financial point of view, from an access to technology point of view, maybe an old laptop, Chromebook, or here, it's quite a unique, a novel thing to use is a Raspberry Pi. They are, I think, really quite funky little devices. You can do so many different things with them. I think that, exploring these sorts of options is really interesting because it does sort of open people's eyes to different technology, and you don't have to have a $600 or an $800 laptop to do this thing. You can actually do it from a €40 or $40 credit card sized single board computer. So yeah, I just think it's interesting and useful to be able to explore these possibilities, give you ideas. It's not for everyone, absolutely. Some people, it's too much, there's too much technology involved in the terminologies are too technical, or it would be too much outside of some people's comfort zones. And that's absolutely fine as well. But just to give you these ideas and see what the possibilities are available to you, hopefully it gives you food for thought and makes lead generation at scale accessible to as many people as possible. And with that, I'd like to say thank you, and I will speak to you in 2 weeks' time, and I'll leave it to Gin to sign off.
Thank you everyone for attending, and hopefully we will see you during our next webinars. Bye-bye.